So interestingly, we got this Guardian article. I just woke up and I saw this. I was like, oh, what is this? The title basically caught my attention here. The NHS's deal with the U.S. company raises privacy concerns, right? We all know that title there. Now, but a unified database could be a medical game changer. So I'm like, okay, this sounds like a positive spin here. And honestly, in my opinion, that's the same thing, right? A unified database, especially in the healthcare context, right? The health system doesn't happen in a isolated hospital, right? It does, but full care, right? They're going to send you to an outpatient. Maybe there's follow-ups that have to happen somewhere else. So in the end, healthcare is very, very interconnected between many different entities, and they may not even be within the same network there. So I did highlight a few points here. Essentially what they're talking about, right? They want to set the premise, what's happening with this NHS deal with Palantir and concerns about privacy. Now, they also want to bring up the other point, like, yeah, you could be scared about sharing your data, but there's a reason why these solutions are made. Data is used to make informative decisions, right? And you're also using it to predict now, and for artificial intelligence as well. The more data that you have, the more powerful it can be. Now, there are, of course, downsides to that too. If you're scared about privacy and the infrastructure around that, they point out the obvious. Without a powerful data system to crunch through everyone's histories, things can fall apart. If you have your main doctor and he doesn't have a database just to know what happened in the past, or if your doctor changes even within the same practice here, that's important. That's happening to me here. My doctor's leaving the system. However, I'm still living in the same area. So I want to stay within the system, and I'm just going to get a new doctor, but he needs to have access to that new information, or that information that's happened in the past, and ensure that I'm not repeating myself. I'm not an expert in necessarily in diagnosing myself or anything of that sort, or just checking on my health overall. Now, what they also point out here too, which is big, they're saying that the NHS's database lags behind those other rich countries. Now, nothing too specific here, but I think the main point is that if your health system, and you would consider the UK a first world country, you would want to at least be on par with other health systems. Now, when we go talk about costs, everyone's going to talk about the United States and it's exorbitant. But if we talk about certain health systems in the United States, especially in larger cities, there are pretty powerful health systems there, honestly. And we know that the main issue, and if you work in healthcare, it is in the rural areas, more disconnected, less resources. But when you get to the big cities, it's honestly pretty good, and it might depend also on your health system. But maybe in the UK, I'm not an expert here, and Haley's also on the UK, so she would probably have a way better perspective there on the NHS experience from a patient point of view. But I think it's interesting that they see themselves as behind other rich countries. And they bring up the most important point here, and I think this is a really good example that brings it home to patients possibly. Surgeons sometimes rely on patients to remember and recite their health records. And if you're a surgeon, you are going to most likely, you're going to deal with invasive things that have higher risk. And if you're relying on patients, it's like relying on eyewitnesses, right? And sometimes the environment for that is not ideal, and that is a big risk there if something's wrong. Someone, especially the elderly, maybe they don't necessarily have their best memory now. They don't know all the diagnoses they had, all the prescriptions they've been using, or sometimes they don't remember if they ate something in the morning. I'm not saying it can be that severe, but eating something right before a surgery is a high risk there. And they always tell you not to eat and stuff. So that was just a very hitting close to home example there. And then they're saying, meanwhile, without a competent data system, direct demand supply, much needed beds, and operating theaters lies empty. So yeah, that's another thing. So that's probably a little more disconnected for people. But yeah, you want to have your health system run as efficient as possible, because if you want a waiting list, then I don't know, I guess you don't care. But you basically don't want a waiting list. And that's kind of the goal there. You want to be able to set your appointment and not have to worry about it. You don't need to wait in line for someone else. That's obviously the ideal state. You can be seen exactly when you need to be. But over time, that should improve if Palantir, at least in their pilot series with the different hospitals, has allowed them to show that. Now, this is where it also gets more pro-Palantir here, which is not necessarily pro-Palantir, but it's definitely not trying to bag against them. So they're saying there's two reassuring facts here of why they're not going to steal your data. And we've talked about this a lot in the Palantir community, but I'll just say it. But they should consider two reassuring facts. First, the law stands in the way. Palantir doesn't have legal access. Alex Karp has said this before. He said it on the record, and I believe in the BBC interview there. I know that was pretty chaotic, at least from my understanding, but I know people in the UK say that's pretty typical. And if it should break the law, the Information Commissioner's Office has the power to sue it into oblivion. Yeah, that makes sense. And second, the company lacks incentives for this type of bad behavior. And I think this is bigger. So there's no point of them doing it. So they're saying it's not seeking to own the information encoded in the data sets. It's not a business of analyzing or selling it. Well, yeah, it's not analyzing it for themselves and then selling that information. It's just helping the customer do the analysis and providing software for handling highly sensitive data, such as the CIA. And we know all those things with the military aspect of Palantir. So this honestly is like the biggest point of this article here. They point it out, and it's nice for someone, especially for the Guardian, to say something like this. I'm not entirely sure for the author here, but this is what the Palantir community has been saying all along. And Alex Karp himself already said the first point. And then second point too, it doesn't make sense for them to sell data. They're not a social media company. They're not selling ads. They're not trying to sell information to pharmaceutical companies here. They make money, and this is everything that their reputation stakes on it. They say at the end, lose that reputation and it loses everything. Yeah, they're not a data broker. And then they continue on here. Patients are already suffering from a joined up system. So that's kind of related to the NHS being behind other first world countries here. And patients are the ones in the end who suffer there. Yeah, there may be a bloated administration possibly, or people just don't have the exact processes in place and it's not clear with the data. However, the true end suffering point is going to be the patients and health outcomes. Now, at the very end here, they just want to conclude the article. Palantir is that plumbing around the data center, the infrastructure here. And it's the government that makes these choices here. And Alex Karp also said this in that BBC interview there with the UK. So this is probably the most pro Palantir article I've seen regarding the NHS. And it's just interesting that they brought this up here. And for someone who's been following this, of course, these are not new points. But it's good that they're getting it out here. And maybe some folks will stumble upon this and it'll either change their perspective or make them at least neutral on it. And that's the big thing. They want to give them a chance.